Before there was Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr., there was Paul Broussard.
It's a violent story. This one stood out for the brutality of it, for the senselessness of it.
It was just horrifying, absolutely horrifying.
Being gay was illegal, effectively. The police hated us. Everybody was in fear of AIDS. Finally, somebody had to die. That could have been any one of us.
It was like a powder keg ready to explode.
It made me angry. It felt like gay people were being killed and no one cared.
I don't know what combination of elements sparked it, but the community rose up in protest.
This was a very unfortunate incident, but it wasn't the only one. I think it woke up the community at large, not only the GLBT community, but the community of Houston.
It's not just a queer that got killed. It's a whole community of people who got hurt.
I think you've got to remember what a homophobic time that the late 80s and early 90s were. You had people like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson saying that AIDS is God's punishment on gays for being homosexual, that God hates gays. In Houston here in 1985, you had Louis Welch, and he was asked, how would you address the kind of crisis with AIDS? And his response was, well, the first thing we do is shoot all the queers. And Louis Welch was not some lunatic fringe person. He had been mayor of Houston for 9 years. So you had this kind of institutional homophobia where it was perfectly okay to denigrate gay people verbally.
Political groups have formed because of oppression. And Houston probably has one of the strongest political groups, the Houston GLBT Political Caucus, because of the oppression in the early days. Bars used to be raided at a regular basis. There used to be a thing called a fag file that the Houston Police Department used to carry. When bars were raided, they would take these pictures and they had a file they called a fag file. Strangely enough, they used to do that right around election time, which just got our people out to vote.
Kathy Whitmire was still mayor, Sylvester Turner was running for mayor, Bob Lanier. I mean, that was a major change. Everything had been pretty static for the 10 years that Kathy Whitmire was mayor, but Houston was growing, I mean, fast.
The Montrose area, it was famous. I had heard of the Montrose ever since I lived in San Antonio 10 years before. And even then, people always said, yeah, you gotta be careful there, it's a gay area. People like to cause trouble.
There was an odd phenomenon going on at the time where we had teenagers from the suburbs coming into Montrose and cruising down Lower Westheimer. It's the very same thing that happens in small towns all across Texas, where teenagers go down to the town square and slowly cruise around and eye each other and park and do whatever they do. But there's always someone who has to be stupid. There's always someone who has a little too much of some intoxicating substance and wants to pick a fight or peel off through the neighborhood.
You know, there had been many muggings and attacks in the neighborhood at that point, and so it was kind of normal to hear that somebody had been mugged or attacked.
A lot of armed robberies, a lot of, and unfortunately a lot of them at that time weren't reported, at least to the police, because the feeling was that the police wouldn't help.
The gay community had an uneven relationship with the police department of Houston.
Montrose is not, and was not then, home to all of the gay bars in Houston, but it was the biggest concentration of them, and that was well known. And so anybody who was either curious or wanted to mess with someone in the gay community would know to come down to Montrose. There was an active community of street prostitutes, an active community of runaway and thrown away teenagers soliciting, and there were a lot of still rough edges around Montrose 25 years ago. It wasn't exactly pioneering to live there, but it was an area that had gone into decline and had not yet come back up again.
Back in the 90s and the 80s, when we walked in the neighborhood, we pretty much walked in the streets. And some of us used to carry whistles around because we knew that lurking in the bushes that there could be somebody attacking.
And unfortunately, a lot of the reason that the ongoing attacks on gay men hadn't become public was a lot of the business owners in the community didn't want that to go out. They didn't want it to impact business in any way. They may be gay men, but they're still businessmen, and they were trying to protect their business interests. It was a tense time in the community, as well as a tense time focusing outward toward the city government.